When a 9-year-old boy walked up to one of the most famous men in the world and asked him for a single dollar, he had no idea who he was talking to. He was just hungry. His class had stopped in a small, beautiful town called Carmel by the Sea during a field trip. The other kids had lunch money. Darrow Finch had empty pockets and a stomach that had been running on cereal since 4:30 that morning. So he did the only thing a boy with a fire in his chest and nothing to lose could do. He walked straight up to a tall stranger on the sidewalk and asked for a dollar. The man looked down at him. He did not walk away. He did not reach into his pocket and hand over the money. He did not say, "Sorry, kid," and keep moving. He stopped. He actually stopped right there on the sidewalk. And he looked at this small, thin boy in shoes that were 2 sizes past their best days. And instead of giving him what he asked for, he said 4 words that Darrow would spend the next 22 years trying to understand. He said, "Sit down with me." What happened on that bench in the next 10 minutes would change Darrow's life so completely that 2 decades later he would stand in front of 500 people, inside a building he had designed himself, with tears running down his face trying to explain it. That stranger was not just any man. He was Clint Eastwood, one of the greatest actors and directors who ever lived. A man known all over the world. A man whose name his own mother had gasped when Darrow finally told her the story a year later. But Darrow had not known that, not even close. To him, the man was simply someone who looked like he had stood in front of hard things and had not stepped back from them. And that stranger did not give him a dollar. What he gave him instead was something so unexpected, so unusual, and so quietly powerful that it set off a chain of events spanning more than 2 decades. Reaching all the way from a hungry 9-year-old on a sidewalk to a building with that stranger's name carved into one of its walls. What was in Clint Eastwood's hand when he reached into his jacket pocket? What did he say to that boy on the bench that no amount of money could have bought? And what did Darrow Finch do with it? Alone in a tiny apartment above a broken laundromat, in a town that had given up on itself, that turned one 10-minute conversation into the most important moment of his entire life. Stay with us for the whole video, because the answer is going to surprise you. And by the time this story's finished, you are never going to think about a single dollar the same way again. Darrow Finch was 9 years old the first time he truly understood that his family was poor. Not the soft, faraway kind of poor. Not the kind you only notice when a birthday comes around and the cake is store-bought instead of homemade, or when the backpack you carry to school is from 2 years ago and the zipper only goes halfway. That kind of poor you can ignore if you try hard enough. You can look the other way. You can pretend. No, what Darrow understood that September morning was the other kind, the sharp kind, the kind that finds you in public, the kind that does not care who is watching. It was the first week of 4th grade at Pelican Bay Elementary, and the teacher, a soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Aldecoa, who wore her dark hair in a braid and kept a small cactus on her desk named Gerald, had asked every student to bring in $2 for the school's art supply fund. $2. She had written it on the board in green marker, underlined it twice, and smiled her wide smile and said it was completely optional, that no one had to give if they could not, that Gerald the cactus would not judge anyone either way. The class laughed. Mrs. Aldecoa was good at making hard things feel easy. But Darrow heard what was underneath the easy. Everyone would bring it. Everyone always brought it. Not bringing it meant something, and they all knew what it meant. He walked home that afternoon thinking about how to ask. He had a system for asking his mother for things. He did not ask when she first came through the door because she was always tired in the first 20 minutes, and the tiredness made everything harder. He did not ask during dinner because dinner was quiet and careful in the Finch house, and interrupting the quiet felt wrong. He asked after dinner when she was sitting at the kitchen table with her cup of tea, when the tired in her face had softened a little, and there was room for a question. That evening he waited. He cleared the table. He rinsed the bowls. He sat across from her and watched her wrap both hands around the mug, the way she always did, like she was warming them even in September. "Mom," he said. She looked up. "My teacher's asking everyone to bring $2 for art stuff." She said it's optional. His mother, Renly Finch, had eyes the color of good, dark coffee. She looked at him with those eyes, and Darrow watched something move through them. Not anger, not sadness exactly, but something in between. Something quiet that passed fast enough that if he had blinked, he would have missed it. She looked back down at her mug. "When does she need it by?" she asked. "Wednesday," Darrow said. She nodded. "Okay, baby, Wednesday, I'll get it to you." He said okay. He went behind the curtain that made his corner of the apartment a room. He lay on his mattress and stared at the water stain on the ceiling that looked like a running dog if you squinted the right way. He had stared at that dog many, many nights. He did not let himself think about whether the money would actually come, because thinking about it made the thing in his chest heavier, and the thing in his chest was already heavy enough. Wednesday came. The $2 did not. His mother had left for Lupe's diner before 5 in the morning, the way she always did. The apartment was quiet and gray when Darrow got up. He ate cereal, he packed his bag. He looked at the small table by the door where his mother sometimes left things for him, notes or a granola bar or a folded dollar. There was nothing there today. He stood in front of that empty table for a moment. Then he picked up his bag and walked to school. In class, Mrs. Aldecoa passed a blue coffee can along each row. It started at the front and moved slowly backward, and each time it reached someone, there was a small sound. The soft, papery fold of a bill dropping in, or the light musical clink of coins. The can filled up row by row like a little song. Darrow watched it come toward him. He thought about how he would handle it. He could let it pass without touching it and just stare at the board. He could pretend he was looking for his money in his backpack for a long time, and then look embarrassed and say he forgot. He could just set the can on the next desk quickly, like it was hot, like he had already put something in and was just passing it along. He was working all of this out when the can arrived. He picked it up. It was heavier than he expected. He held it and felt the weight of everyone else's $2, and he set it on the desk of the girl next to him, Paulette, and he looked straight at the board. From 2 rows behind him came a sound, not a word, not even a full laugh. Just a breath with a shape to it. The kind of sound a person makes when they find something predictable, when something they expected to happen happens on schedule. The person making that sound was a boy named Lenny Powick. Lenny Powick had a new shirt every week and a lunchbox with 3 compartments and a way of saying small things that lodged under your skin, like splinters you couldn't see but could always feel. He didn't say anything out loud. He didn't have to. Mrs. Aldecoa, who noticed more than she let on, looked briefly in Darrow's direction. Their eyes met for just a second. She gave him the smallest nod. Not pity, not exactly. Just the nod of a person who sees you and is telling you so, without making it a whole thing. Darrow nodded back. He picked up his pencil. He looked at the worksheet in front of him. He did not let anything show on his face. He had gotten very good at that. But inside, something had shifted, not broken. Darrow was not the kind of boy who broke easily. His mother had not raised a boy who broke easily, but shifted the way the ground shifts before something big moves. He was tired of this specific feeling. He was tired of the can, in the sound behind him, and the empty table by the door, and the water-stained dog on the ceiling. He was tired of wearing shoes where the cardboard he stuffed in the toes every morning to cover the holes worked itself loose by afternoon. He was tired of the sharp kind of poor, the public kind, the kind that found you anyway, no matter how carefully you tried to hide. He could not fix any of it today. He was 9. He had no money and no plan and no idea what came next. But he decided something. Right there in the 4th row of Mrs. Aldecoa's classroom, with the blue can moving away from him and Lenny Powick's breath laugh still hanging in the air like smoke. He was going to do something. He didn't know what. He didn't know when. He just knew the feeling of deciding. And he held on to it the way he held on to the curtain rod room and his mother's coffee eyes and the water-stained dog. The way you hold on to anything that is yours when everything else is borrowed air. That fire in his chest, it was just getting started. The field trip was not supposed to happen. Darrow found that out on a Thursday in late September, when Mrs. Aldecoa stood at the front of class with a piece of paper in her hand and a look on her face that said she was going to try to make something difficult sound simple. She said the school district had cut the field trip budget in August. She said this was disappointing, but that she was not ready to give up on it. She said she had written a letter to 3 parent volunteers asking if anyone could drive, and she had gotten yes from all three of them. She said a parent named Mrs. Grunder, whose husband ran the only dentist office in Harwich and whose teeth, Darrow had always noticed, were extraordinarily white, had offered to cover the aquarium entry fee for every student who needed help with the cost. Mrs. Aldecoa said that last part without looking at anyone in particular, which meant she was looking at all of them in general, which meant she was making sure Darrow and the 2 or 3 other kids who never had money for things heard it without having to raise their hands and say so out loud. That was how she worked. She built the door into the wall before you even had to knock. Darrow wrote the permission slip that night himself, signed his mother's name the way he had learned to do, looping the W in Renly carefully, putting the right lean on the F in Finch, and put it in his backpack before he went to sleep. He did not feel bad about this. His mother would have signed it if she had been home before 9. She would have signed it and then squeezed his shoulder and told him to have a good time. He was simply doing what needed doing in the order it needed to be done. That was a thing he had gotten good at earlier than most kids ever have to. The night before the trip, he could not sleep. He lay on his mattress and listened to the laundromat below them, cycling through its last loads of the night. That low, turning hum that had been the background music of his entire life, and he thought about the aquarium. Mrs. Aldecoa had described it the week before, walking them through what they would see, her voice getting quieter and slower as she went, the way teachers' voices get when they are genuinely in love with the thing they are teaching. She said the Monterey Bay Aquarium sat right on the water. She said there were otters floating on their backs in an outdoor tank, wrapping themselves in kelp so they did not drift. She said there was a jellyfish room where the light was dim and blue, and the jellyfish moved like slow, silent ghosts, lit up from inside. She said there was a tunnel, a real tunnel, that went under a tank so enormous that sharks swam in it. And you could stand in the middle of the tunnel and look up, and there would be a shark directly above your head, close enough that if the glass were not there, you could reach up and touch it. Darrow had put his hands flat on his desk when she said that. He had breathed through his nose slowly. He had made himself sit still even though something in him wanted to stand up. He wanted to see the sharks. He wanted to stand in that tunnel more than he had wanted almost anything he could think of. And the wanting of it kept him awake well past midnight, looking at the running dog on the ceiling, too excited for sleep. He was up before his alarm. He was dressed before 4:30. He put on his best shirt, blue plaid, a size too small across the shoulders, but clean and free of holes, which was the most important thing. He laced his shoes with special care, tucking the cardboard tighter into the toes than usual, pressing it flat with his thumb. He made his cereal. He ate standing up at the counter, looking out the window at the dark street, at the streetlight and the moths moving in circles around it. He got to school 40 minutes before the vans arrived. He sat on the front steps in the early morning cold and watched the sky go from black to gray to the particular pale gold of a California morning when the fog is thinking about burning off. He was the first student there. He was fine with that. Being first somewhere, for once, felt good. He rode in a minivan driven by a man named Mr. Oduya, who had a round, kind face and wore a San Francisco Giants cap and drove with one hand and talked to nobody in particular about traffic the whole way north. His son Benedict sat in the front passenger seat with his feet on the dashboard, controlling the music from his phone, cycling through songs every 45 seconds with the kind of confidence that belongs to kids who have never had to be careful about anything. In the back, a girl named Suki Tamarlane, who had her nose in a thick paperback from the first minute and came up for air exactly twice on the drive. A boy named Ferris Oakes, who ate an entire bag of salt and vinegar chips in the first hour and offered some to nobody and filled the van with a smell that was hard to forgive. And Darrow pressed against the window, watching the world open up, because that is what it felt like. Harwich was gray and small in the way of a town that had once hoped for something and then stopped hoping. Its buildings were low and a little tired. Its streets were cracked in places. The ocean was there, right at the end of Clement Street. But in Harwich, the ocean was cold and gray and crashing against rocks. And nobody went to the beach much because there was nowhere to sit and the water was too cold to swim in, and the wind came off it like it was trying to say something unfriendly. But north of Harwich, the coast changed. The road climbed and curved. The cliffs got higher, and the water below them got bluer, like someone had turned up the color gradually, the way you turn up a dial. There were cypress trees on the cliff tops, bent sideways from decades of wind, twisted into shapes that looked deliberate, like sculpture. There were houses set back from the road with long driveways and gates and gardens that someone had spent real time and real money on, succulents and ornamental grasses and big leaf things that Darrow could not name. He pressed his face against the glass. He was not sad looking at those houses. He was not angry. He felt something cleaner and more useful than either of those things. He felt the specific wonder of a person realizing that the world is much, much larger than the part of it they have been standing in. People live like this, he thought. Right now, somewhere behind those gates, people are waking up in those houses. They are eating breakfast in those kitchens. This is a thing that is actually happening. The fire in his chest, the one that had started in the fourth row of Mrs. Aldecoa's classroom with the coffee can, moving away from him, burned a little hotter. They stopped in Carmel by the sea. It was unplanned. Benedict needed a bathroom and Mr. Oduya, unfamiliar with the road, missed the highway ramp and pulled off into the town center to regroup and look at his phone's map. Darrow stepped out of the van and stood on a pale stone sidewalk and forgot for a moment to breathe. He had not known places like this existed in real life outside of the books at school. The streets were narrow and lined with trees whose roots had lifted the stones into gentle waves. The shops had hand-painted signs and window boxes, spilling over with purple and orange flowers. Everything was small and deliberate and cared for, the way something looks when many people have loved it for a long time. He walked a little ways down the street on his own while the other kids stood near the van, and Ferris balled up his empty chip bag and looked for a trash can. Darrow just wanted to see more of it. He walked slowly, turning his head, taking it in the way you take in something you know you will only have once. He had gotten about half a block when he saw the man come out of the coffee shop on the corner. Tall, white-haired, a face made entirely of angles and long years in weather. He moved slowly but not weakly, the kind of slow that belongs to someone who has learned that almost nothing actually needs to be rushed. He was carrying a small paper coffee cup. He wore dark jeans and a plain gray jacket. He looked like someone who had long ago stopped caring what anyone thought about what he was wearing, which gave him a particular kind of dignity. Darrow did not know who he was. He had no cable television, no movie nights, no posters on the walls. The name Clint Eastwood meant nothing to him. He had no frame to put the man in, no category to file him under. What he had was a feeling. The man looked like someone who had stood in front of hard things and had not stepped back. Like someone who had seen the worst versions of moments and had chosen, again and again, not to become hard because of it. Darrow could not have put any of that into words. He was 9, but he felt it the way you feel weather before it arrives. A pressure change, a shift in the air. His stomach made a sound. He had eaten at 4:30 and it was almost 11, and he had no money for lunch, and he had known that coming in and had said nothing to anyone because saying nothing was almost always easier than saying something. But his stomach did not understand about easier. His stomach had its own opinions and was sharing them now. He looked at the man. He looked back at the van. Ferris had found the trash can. Suki was still reading. Mr. Oduya was looking at his phone. He looked at the man again. The fire in his chest said, "Go." And because Darrow Finch at 9 years old had not yet learned all the ways that wanting something can embarrass you into staying still, he walked up to the tall man with the coffee cup and the weather-carved face, and he said, clearly and without his voice shaking even a little, "Excuse me, sir. Could I have $1?" The man stopped. He looked down at Darrow, and the whole world seemed to go very, very quiet. The man stopped. He did not step around Darrow the way adults sometimes did when a child said something inconvenient on a sidewalk. He did not reach into his pocket immediately, the fast, distracted way people hand things over when they want a moment to end. He simply stopped walking and looked down, and the looking was so steady and complete that Darrow felt, for just a second, like he was the only thing on the street worth looking at. Not annoyed, not warm yet either, just looking. The way a person looks when they have decided, fully and without reservation, to pay attention. $1? The man said. His voice was low and dry, like gravel shifting at the bottom of something deep. "Yes, sir," Darrow said. "For lunch. You by yourself out here?" "No, sir. I'm on a field trip." Darrow pointed back toward the van without turning his head because he did not want to break the eye contact. He had the feeling that breaking it would cost him something. "My class is back there. We stopped so someone could use the bathroom." The man looked in the direction Darrow had pointed. He looked long enough to take it in. The van, Mr. Oduya, still leaning on the hood with his phone, Ferris throwing his chip bag at a trash can and missing. And then he brought his eyes back to Darrow. "What's your name?" "Darrow?" The man considered this the way you consider something that surprises you in a quiet way. "That's an unusual name." "Yes, sir. My mom made it up. She wanted something that was just mine." Something moved in the man's face at that. A shift, so small that most people would have missed it entirely. But Darrow had been reading adult faces since before he had the words to explain why, and he caught it. Something in the man's eyes settled, like a decision being made below the surface. "Do you know who I am?" the man asked. Darrow looked at him. The white hair, the angular face, the patient, weather-worn eyes. "No, sir," he said, which was the complete and total truth. A pause. Then the man made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was in the same neighborhood. Quiet, through the nose like something he had not expected. "How old are you, Darrow?" 9, almost 10 in December. "And you're in school?" "4th grade, Pelican Bay Elementary in Harwick." "Do you like school?" Darrow paused. Not to be polite, actually paused. The way you pause when someone asks you something real and you want to give them a real answer instead of the easy one. "I like learning things," he said. "I don't always like everything that happens at school, but learning something I didn't know before, yeah, I like that." The man nodded, slow and deliberate, like a person confirming something they had already suspected. "What do you like to learn about?" "Everything," Darrow said, and he meant it all the way down. Then, because he had the feeling this man could tell when a person was being lazy with words, he added, "But mostly I want to know how things work, not just what they are, why they are. Like, why is the ocean the color it is? How does electricity travel through a wire and come out as light? Why do some people have a lot and other people don't have enough?" He stopped. Things like that. The silence that followed was different from the silences Darrow was used to. It was not the silence of someone thinking about something else. It was the silence of someone listening so hard there was no room left for sound. Then the man put his coffee cup on top of a newspaper box beside them, very carefully, as if setting it down was part of a decision he was making. He bent forward, not all the way down because he was very tall and there were physical limits, but enough that his face was closer to level with Darrow's. Enough that Darrow could see the deep lines at the corners of his eyes. Lines that come from decades of squinting at things far away and deciding what to do about them. "That last one," the man said. "Why some people have a lot and other people don't. Have you figured that out yet?" "No, sir," Darrow said. "That's exactly why I want to." The man looked at him for 3 full seconds without speaking. Then he picked up his coffee, straightened up slightly and said, "I'm not going to give you $1. Darrow's whole body did a thing. Not visible. He was practiced at keeping things off his face. But inside, something dropped. Something that had been extended pulled back fast, the way a hand pulls back from a hot surface. He had done the hard thing. He had walked up to a stranger and asked out loud for something he needed, and the answer was no, and now he had to figure out how to shrink back to the van without losing whatever was left of his dignity. He started to step back. The man held up one hand, just one, an open palm, patient and firm. "Wait," he said. "I said I'm not giving you $1. I did not say I'm not going to help you. There is a difference. $1 will be gone by 2 o'clock. You follow me?" Darrow stopped. "Yes, sir." "Good." The man looked at the small wooden bench outside the coffee shop, a few feet away. "Sit down with me for a minute." Darrow glanced back at the van. Mr. Oduya was still on his phone. Nobody was looking. He sat down on the bench. The man sat beside him. Not crowding, he left a respectful amount of space. the way someone sits when they want you to know you can leave if you need to. He stretched his long legs out in front of him and looked at the pale stone street for a moment, the way a person looks when they are choosing exactly the right place to begin. "My name is Clint," he said. "Hi," said Darrow. "I did not grow up with money either," Clint said. "Not close. I grew up in a family that moved around a lot because there was always somewhere cheaper to be. Oakland, Seattle, back to California. You know what I had more of than anything else?" Darrow shook his head. "Time," Clint said. "Empty time. Hours and days with nothing good to fill them and nobody telling me what to fill them with. And when you are young and you have that much empty time, the world offers you two roads. You understand what I mean?" "I think so," Darrow said carefully. "Tell me." Darrow looked at the street. A pigeon was making its way along the curb with enormous concentration, like it had somewhere important to be and was taking its responsibilities very seriously. Darrow watched it for a second. "You can use the time to build something," he said slowly, "or you can use it to tear things down, including yourself." Clint was quiet. Then he said with the kind of directness that does not need volume behind it, "I have told that to men 3 times your age and waited 20 minutes for half that answer. You got there in 10 seconds. Darrow did not know what to do with that. He was not used to being told he was fast at things by strangers who had no reason to say it if it was not true. He looked at his shoes. "I want to tell you something," Clint said. "Something it took me a long time and a lot of wrong turns to understand. I am going to give it to you now, for free, because you look like someone who will actually use it. Can you hold on to things? When you decide to remember something, do you remember it?" "Yes, sir," Darrow said. "I remember almost everything I decide to keep." "All right." Clint set his coffee down on the bench beside him and turned so he was looking directly at Darrow. Not angled, not sideways, but fully, the way you look at someone when you want them to know that what you are saying is meant for them specifically and no one else. Here it is. The thing that decides whether a person stays stuck or gets free. It is not money. Money helps, but it is not the thing. It is not luck, although luck plays its part. The thing, the actual thing, is whether somebody looked at you early enough and said, "You are worth something. You have something in you worth building on." That's it. That's the whole engine. The street went quiet. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe it was exactly as loud as before. But Darrow had gone somewhere inside himself where sound didn't reach as easily. "Did anybody say that to you?" Clint asked. "Early enough?" Darrow thought about his mother at the kitchen table, counting pennies, looking up at him with those tired, coffee-dark eyes. He thought about her saying softly and often, "You are smart, baby. You are so smart. I don't know where you came from, but I'm glad you came to me." He thought about Lenny Powick, broke boy. He thought about the blue coffee can moving past him without stopping. "My mom," he said. "She tells me I'm smart." "Good," Clint said firmly. "She's right. I have spoken to you for less than 5 minutes, and I know she is right. But I am going to say it too, because it doesn't hurt to hear it from more than one direction." He paused. "And I am going to tell you one more thing. The last thing. Are you ready?" "Yes, sir." Clint looked at him steadily. "You are not what happened to you. You are what you decide to do next. You can write that on a piece of paper and carry it in your pocket and read it every day until you are old, and it will never once stop being true." A seagull cried somewhere above the rooftops, sharp and bright, and then gone. Darrow sat completely still. Inside him something was moving, rearranging itself, like a room being quietly reorganized while the lights were off. He didn't fully understand it yet, but he could feel it. The way you feel when something true lands in you. Not like a surprise, but like a recognition. Like your own name being called from across a long distance. Then the man reached into the inner pocket of his gray jacket. He pulled something out. He held it toward Darrow. Darrow opened his hand and took it. He looked down. It was not $1. It was a card. Not $1. Not a 5. Not a folded bill of any kind. A card. Darrow turned it over once in his fingers. The way you turn something over when you are trying to understand what kind of thing it is before you decide what to feel about it. It was small and thick, cream-colored, the color of good paper that costs more than regular paper. The front had raised lettering on it, letters pressed into the surface with enough weight behind them that you could feel them with your thumb, even with your eyes closed. At the top, a name. In the middle, a phone number. Below that, an address in Carmel. And then, at the bottom, separated from the rest by a thin line. 3 words. Just 3. Darrow read them. Don't stop learning. He read them again. He looked up. The man, Clint, was watching him with the same steady attention he had given him from the beginning. The kind of attention that does not flicker or wander, that stays on you like a hand on your shoulder. That is my personal number, Clint said. His voice was unhurried, the way rivers move when they are deep and confident of their direction. Not an office, not somebody who works for me. Me. If you dial that number, I pick up. He let that land for a moment. But there is a condition. Darrow held the card carefully, as if it might change its mind. You call that number in 1 year. Exactly 1 year from today, not sooner. And when you call, you tell me 3 things. You ready to hear them? Yes, sir. One thing you learned this year that you didn't know before the day we met. One problem you tried to solve. It doesn't matter if you solved it all the way or only part way, just that you tried with your whole effort. And one thing you want to learn next. He paused. That is all. 3 things. You do those 3 things honestly, with real work behind them, and you call that number, and I will answer, and we will see what comes after. You understand? Darrow understood. He understood the way you understand something when it drops into you at exactly the right depth. Not just in your head, but somewhere below that, somewhere close to where the fire lived. Yes, sir, he said. He almost left it there. He almost said thank you and put the card in his pocket and walked back to the van and carried the whole thing silently the way he carried most things. But there was a question in him that was bigger than his habit of being quiet, and it pushed itself up and out before he could decide whether or not to let it. But why? He said. Why me? You don't know anything about me. You didn't even know my name 5 minutes ago. The man looked at him for a long moment. The sun had shifted and was coming over the rooftops now, full and warm, and it fell across the pale stone street and lit up the window boxes full of flowers and lay across the man's shoulders like something earned. He looked to Darrow like a figure from a painting, big and still and surrounded by light. Somebody did something for me once, Clint said. When I was young and had nothing and was heading in a direction that would not have ended well, somebody stopped and paid attention and gave me something I did not know I needed. I have been carrying that debt for a very long time. He paused. I am getting older, Darrow, and the older you get, the more clearly you see the debts that are still unpaid. I am working on mine. Darrow turned that over in his mind the way he had turned the card in his fingers. You said that was one reason, Darrow said, but there was another one. The man's eyes sharpened slightly, not with surprise exactly, more like confirmation. You did not ask me for very much, Clint said. $1, just $1, not a miracle, not everything. $1 for a meal on a Tuesday morning. There is an honesty in that, in asking for exactly what you need and not one thing more, that most people spend their whole lives never learning. He let that sit. You already know it. At 9 years old, you already know it. That told me something. Darrow did not know what to say to that. He was not sure there was anything to say. He pressed his thumb gently against the raised letters on the card. Don't stop learning, and felt them like a small geography, a landscape pressed into paper. Clint stood up, slowly with the deliberate care of a tall man who has learned to be careful in the movements that used to be easy. He picked up his coffee cup and looked down at Darrow one final time with those sun-weathered eyes. 1 year, he said. 1 year, Darrow said back. The man nodded, once clean, final, and walked away down the pale stone street. His footsteps were quiet on the stone. Darrow watched him go, watched the gray jacket and the white hair and the unhurried walk, watched him turn the corner at the end of the block and disappear as simply as he had appeared, as if the town had opened to let him through and then closed again. The street was just a street again. Mr. Oduya's voice came from the direction of the van. "Darrow, let's go, buddy." Darrow closed his fingers around the card and walked back. He did not tell anyone. Not Suki, who looked up briefly from her book as he climbed in. Not Ferris, who had somehow produced a second bag of chips. Not Mr. Oduya, who said, "Okay, gang, Monterey," and swung the van back onto the road with the confidence of a man who still wasn't entirely sure where he was going. He put the card in his front left pocket. The good one, the one with no hole in the corner. He pressed his hand flat against it through the fabric of his jeans and kept it there for the first few miles, the way you keep a hand over something important to make sure it's still real. On the ride north, Suki looked up once and said, "You're really quiet." "I'm okay," he said. "You look like you're thinking about something big." He looked out the window at the water. "Maybe," he said. She went back to her book. He went back to the window. At the Monterey Bay Aquarium, he did everything Mrs. Aldecoa had described. He saw the otters floating on their backs in the outdoor tank, rolled in kelp like small, unconcerned bundles, watching the sky with round, dark eyes. He stood in the blue jellyfish room and let his eyes adjust to the dim light until the jellyfish came into focus, pale and slow and lit from somewhere inside themselves, moving with a patience that seemed entirely outside of time. And he walked through the tunnel. He walked into it and stopped in the very center, the way he had planned since the night before when he could not sleep, and he tilted his face up. The glass curved above him. The water was very blue and very full. A school of silver fish turned in formation, so perfectly timed it looked like one long, liquid thing. Two sharks moved in long, slow arcs overhead, like gray thoughts going nowhere urgent. And a manta ray came. It crossed directly above him, broad and dark and silent, its wings moving in the lazy way of something that has never once had to hurry. It passed over him like a shadow with grace, and Darrow stood there with his mouth slightly open and his left hand pressed flat against his front pocket where the card was, and his right hand hanging at his side, and he thought very clearly and very quietly, "I am going to remember this day for the rest of my life." He was right. That night after his mother had come home and they had eaten the soup she had left warming on the stove, and she had asked about the trip and he had told her about the sharks and the jellyfish and the otters, and she had smiled the full smile, not the tired one, but the real one, the one she kept in reserve. After all of that, after she had gone to bed and the laundromat below them had gone quiet and Harik was just dark and salt-aired and still, Darrow took the card out of his pocket. He set it on the small shelf above his mattress, the shelf where he kept his second-grade spelling bee certificate, slightly curled at the corners, where he kept the photograph of his mother laughing at something he would never know, taken before he was born, when she was young in a way that looked effortless, where he kept the two best rocks he had ever found on the beach at the end of Clement Street, one gray-green and smooth as glass, one rust-red, with a single white line running through it like a careful thought. He set the card there, among his best things. He lay back on his mattress. He looked at the ceiling, at the water stain that looked like a running dog if you held your eyes the right way. He read the card one more time from memory in the dark. Don't stop learning. He didn't plan to. Darrow Finch spent the next 12 months becoming someone. He did not do it loudly. He did not wake up the morning after Carmel with a new walk and a chest full of speeches. He was still the same boy in the same apartment above the same humming laundromat. Still the same shoes, same 8-block walk, same bowl of cereal with water when the milk ran out. Still lonely in the particular way of evenings when your mother is not home yet and the apartment holds its breath around you and the only sound is the street below and the turning of machines. But something had changed that could not be seen from the outside. He had a task. 3 things, in 1 year, for a man who had said he would answer the phone. It sounds small when you say it like that. 3 things, a year. But for a boy who had never had a real deadline attached to a real person who was genuinely waiting, it was not small at all. It was a rope dropped into the well he had been standing at the bottom of, and he gripped it with both hands and did not let go. November came cold and gray off the water, and Darrow made his first decision. He was going to learn about electricity. This was not random. He had thought about it carefully, the way he was beginning to think about most things, turning them over, looking at the underside, asking why before he asked what. The reason he chose electricity was specific. The lights in their apartment went off sometimes. When the bill was too big and the money wasn't there, Mr. Preto, their landlord, would cut the power for 2 or 3 days until Renly scraped the payment together. During those days, Darrow did his homework by the light of a candle his mother kept in the kitchen drawer, the flame throwing long, shifting shadows across his notebook. He had always hated not understanding why. The lights worked, then they didn't, then they did again. Somewhere in between, something happened that involved money and wires, and a decision made by a person he had never met. He wanted to understand the whole chain. He wanted to see it clearly from one end to the other. He went to the Harwick Public Library. He had been inside it exactly twice before. Once on a school visit in 2nd grade, and once when he had gone with a classmate to return her books because she was sick and her mother had asked Darrow's mother, and his mother had said yes and sent him. Both times he had stood at the edges of the place and looked in without really entering, the way you stand at the door of a party where you don't know anyone and try to decide if you belong. This time he walked straight to the desk. The librarian was a woman named Georgette Nufo. She had natural hair pulled back from her face and reading glasses on a beaded chain that rested on the front of her blouse when she wasn't wearing them. She was somewhere between 40 and 60. Darrow could not pin it down any closer. And she had the warmest voice he had ever heard in a public building. Not warm the way people are warm when they are performing warmth. Warm the way a room is warm when someone has been caring for it for a long time. "Can I help you?" she said, looking up from something on her desk. "I want to learn about electricity," Darrow said. "How it works, where it comes from, why it costs money." Georgette looked at him over the top of her glasses for a moment. Then she stood up. "Follow me," she said. She did not hand him a single book and send him to a table. She walked him through 3 different sections: science, history, and what she called practical knowledge. And she pulled books from the shelves the way a person pulls the right tool from a belt, without hesitation, without doubt, knowing exactly what each one was for. She stacked 4 books on the table in front of him, and then she sat down across from him and opened the first one and said, "Let's make sure the vocabulary isn't going to slow you down." For 20 minutes she went through it with him, not reading to him, asking him. "What does this word mean? What do you think this diagram is showing? What would happen based on what you just read if you interrupted the circuit here?" Darrow answered. Every time. Sometimes slowly, sometimes wrong at first and then corrected. But every time he tried and every time Georgette waited for him to finish trying before she said anything else. When she stood up to go back to the desk, she said, "You come back when you finish those. There are more where they came from." He came back 46 more times that year. He filled 1 notebook and started a second. He underlined things in pencil, lightly so the lines could be erased, because the books belonged to the library, and the library belonged to everyone, and he was not the kind of person who damaged things that belonged to everyone. He wrote what he underlined into his own notebook in his own words, which Georgette had told him was the best way to know if you actually understood something. If you could not say it in your own words, you had memorized it, but you had not learned it. Those were different things. He learned how electricity moved through wires. He learned where it came from. Power plants, turbines, fuel burned or water falling, or wind turning great slow blades against a wide sky. He followed the chain all the way from the source to the outlet in the kitchen wall, and when he understood it completely, he felt the particular satisfaction of a map that finally shows you where you are. From electricity, he went sideways into light, how it scattered, why the sky was blue, why the ocean changed color depending on the depth and the time of day. That led him to a book about physics that Georgette pulled from the adult section without comment, setting it in front of him with a look that said she expected him to handle it, which meant he did. From physics, he went to history because he wanted to understand the part of his question the man in Carmel had not answered. Why some people had enough and some people did not. He read about the Great Depression, about dust storms and empty banks and fathers who walked away from farms they had built because the land had stopped giving back. He read about what happened to families when the structure underneath them disappeared. He recognized things in that reading, not the scale of it, but the feeling underneath it. And then Georgette handed him a biography of a man named Frederick Douglass. He read it in 4 sittings. The last sitting was on a Saturday in February, cross-legged on the library floor in the aisle because all the chairs were taken. And when he finished the last page, he sat there for a few minutes without moving, just breathing. The way you sit after something has moved through you, and you need a moment before you go back to being a regular person. He wrote in his notebook that night, "A man who taught himself to read because someone told him he wasn't supposed to, and then he changed the world with what he read. Learning is not a small thing. Learning is the whole thing." In January, the pipe broke. The laundromat below them had old pipes, the kind that gave up in the cold. And one night, a joint split in water came up through the floorboards of their apartment like it was making a point. It ruined the carpet in the corner where Darrow slept. His mattress smelled like mold for 6 weeks. He wedged it up against the wall during the day to try to let it dry and put it flat again at night, and slept on it anyway because there was nowhere else to sleep. He asked his mother about the landlord. She said she had called Mr. Prieto twice. Mr. Prieto had said he would send someone. Someone had not come. Darrow thought about this for 2 days. On the 3rd day, he went to the library. He found Georgette. He told her what he needed. She took him to a section he had never visited, tenant rights, California housing law, and helped him understand what he was looking at without telling him what to do with it. That part he decided himself. He wrote Mr. Prieto a letter. He wrote it in his best handwriting, which was very good because he had practiced it, because he had read that clear handwriting told the reader you took the communication seriously. He stated the problem, the date it began, the date Mr. Prieto had made his promise, and the number of days that had elapsed since then. He cited the section of California law he had found that said landlords were required to maintain habitable conditions. He noted that a child sleeping on a mold-damaged mattress was a health issue. He signed it with his full name and his age, because he had decided that a landlord who knew he was dealing with a 9-year-old and still did nothing deserved to have that fact on the record. 11 days later, a repairman knocked on their door. Renly Finch let the man in and watched him fix the floor, and when he was gone, she stood in the kitchen doorway and looked at Darrow with an expression that stopped him completely. It was not the tired look. It was not the worried look. It was something he had not seen before. Something that was made of equal parts surprise and pride, and a kind of wondering sadness that he did not fully understand until years later, when he was old enough to know what it looks like when a parent realizes their child has quietly grown past needing them in certain ways. "How did you know to do that?" she asked. "I read about it," he said. She sat down at the table. She looked at him for a long time. "Darrow," she said softly, "what happened to you?" He thought about the bench on the pale stone sidewalk, the coffee cup set down carefully, the card pressed into his hand. "Nothing bad," as he said. "Something good." She waited. He could see she wanted more, but he wasn't ready to give it yet. He did not know how to hand someone a story that sounded impossible without watching their face change in a way that would make it smaller. He needed to wait until it was too real to shrink. He would tell her, just not yet. March arrived and the rains came in off the Pacific the way they did every year, gray and steady and without apology. Georgette set a book on the table in front of him without preamble, the way she did when she had decided he was ready for something without being asked. The book was called The Story of Architecture. He opened it. He looked at the first photograph, a great stone building in Rome, columns rising in the early morning light. The shadow of 2,000 years falling across a courtyard where pigeons walked with the same self-important pace as the one he had watched in Carmel. Something clicked. Not loud, not dramatic. The small, definitive click of a thing falling into exactly the right position. He wanted to know how buildings worked. Not just the engineering, though that too, absolutely that, but the whole question of how a person looked at an empty piece of land and decided what should stand on it. How you built a place where people could be sheltered and human and safe. How you made a space that told the people inside it, you belong here. You are welcome here. Somebody thought about you when they built this. He read the book twice. He started a third notebook. He knew what his third thing was going to be. Summer passed. Fifth grade came and went. Lenny Powick, whose specific cruelties had decorated every school day for 3 years, had moved to another district over the summer, and when Darrow realized he was not there on the first day of school, he felt something open up in his chest like a window being unstuck. Not joy, exactly, just the sudden presence of air where there had not been air before. His mother bought him new shoes in September. She had been saving since June. She set them on the kitchen table on Labor Day weekend, already in the box, and she watched him open the box, and the look on her face was the look of someone who has been planning a gift for a long time and has thought about the giving of it almost as much as the gift itself. He put them on. He walked across the kitchen. He looked down at them. No cardboard in the toes. No holes. Just shoes that fit, that were his, that no one had worn before him. He looked up at his mother. He did not say anything. She did not say anything either. October came. He had been counting the days since July, when the count had gotten manageable enough to make counting feel reasonable. The card sat on the shelf above his mattress, between the spelling bee certificate and his mother's photograph, worn soft at the corners now from being held so many times. The number he had looked at nearly every day for 12 months. His heart knocked around in his chest on the morning of the anniversary, like it was trying to remind him of something he already knew. He picked up the phone. He waited until his mother left for Morrow's, 5:45 in the evening. The door closed behind her with its familiar small click, the sound that had been marking the beginning of Darrow's alone hours for as long as he could remember. He listened to her footsteps on the stairs, 12 steps, then the heavier thud of the fire door at the bottom, and then the building went quiet the way it always did when it was just him and the hum of the laundromat below. He did not move right away. He sat at the kitchen table with the card in front of him, flat on the table, and the phone beside it, and he breathed the way Georgette had once described breathing before she had to do something frightening. Slow in through the nose, hold for 3 counts, slow out. She had told him this one afternoon in November, when he had asked her how she stayed calm during the times when things felt too big. She had pressed her fingers together on the desk and said, "You remember that you have survived every hard thing so far. Then you breathe. Then you go." He breathed. He looked at the card, the letters pressed into the cream-colored surface, the 3 words at the bottom, worn soft now from being read so many times, they had become part of him. He looked at the number. He picked up the phone and dialed before the scared part of him could negotiate. It rang once, twice, 3 times, and the air in his chest started pulling tight. 4 times, and he was already beginning to construct the story he would tell himself afterward. That it had been a long shot, that a man like that would not really keep a promise made to a 9-year-old on a sidewalk, that the card had still been worth something, even if the number led nowhere, that he had learned things this year that no phone call could take back. The line opened. A voice, low, dry and steady, like something that had never once been rattled. "Yeah." Darrow's heart crashed once against his ribs and then settled. "Hi," he said. His voice came out smaller than he had practiced it. He cleared his throat and tried again. "This is Darrow. We met in Carmel by the sea last October. I asked you for $1 on the sidewalk, and you sat down with me instead. You gave me a card. You told me to call you in exactly 1 year." The pause that followed lasted perhaps 3 seconds. To Darrow, it felt like a weather system moving through. Then, "I remember." 2 words, that was all. But the exhale that left Darrow's body when he heard them took almost everything tight in him along with it. "I have my 3 things," he said. "All right." The voice was unhurried, giving him the whole space of the call. "Let's hear them." Darrow pulled his notebook in front of him. He had written the 3 things down in late September, then rewritten them in October, then crossed out and rewritten them again the night before because the first 2 drafts had felt either too small or too large, and he had wanted to get the exact right size. He had practiced saying them aloud in his room with the curtain pulled. Not performing, just making sure the words were in the right order and would come out steady. He smoothed the page with his palm. "The thing I learned this year," he said, "is that the world is much bigger than the part of it I've been standing in. I learned about electricity, how it's made, how it travels, why it costs money. I learned about light and why the ocean changes color. I learned about the Great Depression and why whole families can lose everything that isn't their fault. And I read about Frederick Douglass, who taught himself to read because someone told him he wasn't allowed to, and then he changed history with what he learned. He paused, then added the last part because it was the truest part. I learned that the library is free, and that free things can be the most important things in the world. He stopped. From the other end of the line, nothing. No sound at all except the faint presence of an open connection. But it was not the silence of disinterest. Darrow had spent enough time reading silences to know the difference. It was the silence of someone listening completely. "Go on," said the voice. "The problem I tried to solve," Darrow said, "was that the pipe in the laundromat below our apartment broke in January, and the water came up through the floor and ruined the carpet where I sleep. The landlord promised to fix it and didn't for 6 weeks. I slept on a mattress that smelled like mold." He kept his voice even. "I wrote him a letter. I looked up tenant rights at the library and I cited the section of California housing law that says landlords have to maintain habitable conditions. I told him a child sleeping on mold was a health issue and that I had the dates and the record of his broken promise in writing." He took a breath. He sensed someone in 11 days. The silence that followed was different from the first one. Heavier, fuller. The kind of silence that is not empty, but full of something unsaid. Then, very quietly, so quietly that Darrow pressed the phone harder against his ear, the man said, "Good." Just that. One word. But the weight behind it made it land like a full sentence. "The thing I want to learn next," Darrow said, and he sat up straighter without thinking about it, because this part was the part he cared about most, "is architecture. I want to know how buildings are made. Not just the bricks and beams part. The whole thing. How someone decides what a building should be. How you make a place where people feel like they belong. How you turn an idea into somewhere real that someone can live their life inside." He stopped. The pause that followed was the longest of the entire call. Long enough that Darrow counted without meaning to. 7 seconds. 8. "You're 10 years old now," the man said. Not a question. 10 and 2 months, Darrow said. Another pause, shorter this time. Then, "That is a good list, Darrow. That is a genuinely good list." His voice had changed slightly. Not softer, but less guarded, the way a door sounds different when someone has decided to open it wider. "You wrote a letter to your landlord, at 9 years old, alone. You found the law, you cited it correctly, and you got the result." "Yes, sir." "And you're sleeping on a floor that doesn't smell like mold anymore." "Yes, sir. They fixed it properly." "All right." A pause, and in the pause, Darrow could feel something being decided. "I said I would do my part if you did yours. You did yours. So here is mine." The voice settled into the calm, deliberate rhythm of someone delivering something they have already thought through completely. "I have a friend. His name is Ogilvy. He runs the architecture department at a university in San Francisco. He also runs a Saturday program, free, no cost, for young people who are serious about design and building. I am going to call him and tell him about you, but you would need to get yourself to San Francisco on Saturdays. That part I am leaving to you." Darrow's mind moved fast. Harwick to San Francisco was 90 miles. No car. His mother worked Saturdays at Morrow's, 8 in the morning to 4 in the afternoon. Bus routes. He would have to look those up. Cost of a bus. Time. "My mom works Saturdays," he said. "I know that is hard," the man said. "I am not going to pretend it isn't. But solving hard things is part of this arrangement. If you can figure out the transportation, find a way, build one, ask for help if you need to, but solve it, then I will make the call to Ogilvy. Can you do that?" Darrow looked at the kitchen table. He looked at the glass jar on the counter that had once held pennies, counted one by one, which was not full now, but was fuller than it had been. He looked at the window above the sink, at the dark street, at the streetlight. He thought about Georgette, about the way she drove to her sister's in Daly City on weekends, about how Daly City sat right against the edge of San Francisco, like a step before the last step. Something opened up quietly in the back of his mind. Not a solution yet, the shape of where a solution might fit. "Yes, sir," he said. "I can figure it out." "Good," said the man. "Call me back when you have." The line went quiet. Darrow set the phone down on the table. He sat in the kitchen for a long time. The card in front of him, the street light painting a pale square on the floor, the laundromat below him turning and turning in the dark. Then he picked up his notebook and opened it to a fresh page and wrote one word at the top. How? And he got to work. Renly Finch came home at 9:23. Darrow knew the time because he had been watching the clock on the microwave since 8:15, which was when he had closed his notebook, capped his pen, and decided he would not go to sleep until he had told her. He had carried this thing for a full year. He had carried it carefully and deliberately. The way you carry something fragile through a crowd, protecting it with both arms, not letting anyone jostle it. But the year was done now. The call was made. The thing was real enough to hand to someone else without worrying it would come apart in their hands. He heard her key in the lock. He heard the door. He heard the specific sound of her work shoes coming off, a small thud each, and the quieter sound of her padding across the floor in her socks toward the kitchen, where she always went first to pour a glass of water before anything else. She came around the corner and saw him at the table and stopped. "You're still up," she said. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Can you sit down?" She looked at him the way mothers look at their children when those children are being unusually serious. Scanning, reading, checking for the kind of trouble that needs an immediate response. She found nothing alarming. She pulled out the chair across from him and sat. Still in her Morrow's apron, her dark hair escaping from its braid, the way it always did by the end of a long shift. "Okay," she said. "I'm sitting." Darrow put his hands flat on the table. He had thought about where to begin and had decided the only honest place was the very beginning, which was October of last year, which was the field trip, which was Carmel by the sea. He began. He told her everything. He told it in order, without rushing, because he had learned from reading that the order of a story was part of what made it true. That if you scrambled the order, you scrambled the meaning, and he did not want to scramble this. He told her about the van and about stopping in Carmel because Benedict needed a bathroom and Mr. Oduya missed the ramp. He told her about walking down the pale stone street alone, just looking, because he had never seen a place like that. He told her about the tall man coming out of the coffee shop and about walking up to him and about asking for $1. He watched her face change when he said that. Something moved behind her eyes, a flash of something that might have been alarm, but she kept it contained and kept listening. He told her about the bench, about the conversation, about the two roads, about what the man had said. "You are not what happened to you. You are what you decide to do next." And as he said it, he watched it go into his mother's face and stay there. He told her about the card, about the 3 words on it, about placing it on the shelf with his best things, about the library in Georgette and 47 visits, about the notebooks, about Frederick Douglass, about January and the mold, and the letter to Mr. Prieto and the 11 days. He told her about the phone call he had made that afternoon while she was at Morrow's, about the 4 rings, about hearing the voice and recognizing it, about reporting his 3 things, about the man saying good in that one quiet word that weighed more than most speeches, and about what had come at the end. Professor Ogilvy, San Francisco, the Saturday program, the transportation problem he had been asked to solve himself. He told her about Georgette and Daly City and the idea that had opened up in the back of his mind during the call. Then he stopped. The kitchen was very quiet. The laundromat hummed below them, steady and indifferent as always. The refrigerator made its small, mechanical sound. Outside the window, a car passed, its headlights crossing the ceiling in a slow sweep. Renly Finch sat across from her son and did not speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was careful in the way of someone who is using great precision to hold something together. "You kept all of that," she said, "inside you, for an entire year." "I didn't want to tell you until I knew it was real," Darrow said. "I was afraid if I told you before the call, and then the call went nowhere, it would just be a story. I wanted it to be a fact first." She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the kitchen light. "The man," she said. "The man on the sidewalk." She paused. "What did he say his name was?" "Clint," Darrow said. His mother was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said very evenly, "Darrow. His name is Clint Eastwood." Darrow looked at her. "Who is that?" She made a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a cry, something precisely in the hallway between the two, and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth for a moment. When she lowered it, she was shaking her head slowly, with the expression of a person who has just been handed a fact that is too large and too strange to do anything with it except accept it. "He is one of the most famous actors and directors who has ever lived," she said. "He is known all over the world. Your grandmother had a poster of him when I was young." She paused. "And you walked up to him on a sidewalk and asked him for $1. Darrow considered this information. "I didn't know that," he said. "I know you didn't." And this time the sound she made was a laugh. A real one. Full and sudden. The kind of laugh that surprises the person laughing. That comes out before it can be stopped. That sounds like something freed. That is, without question, the most Darrow Finch thing that has ever happened in the entire history of anything. Darrow felt the corners of his mouth move upward. He had not smiled much today. There had been too much else going on inside him. But this felt right. They sat together at the table for a while, not talking, just being in the same room with the weight of the year between them, which was somehow lighter now that it was shared. Then Darrow said carefully, "The Saturday program in San Francisco." "I heard that part," Renly said. "I was thinking about Georgette, Mrs. Nufo. She goes to her sister's in Daly City on Saturdays sometimes. Daly City is right next to San Francisco. I looked it up. It is literally connected on the map. If I asked her if she'd be willing to bring me along on some of those Saturdays and drop me at the program, I could take the city bus back to Daly City when it was done, and she could pick me up from her sister's on the way home. It wouldn't cost much, maybe nothing." He stopped. "I haven't asked her yet. I wanted to ask you first." His mother looked at him across the table. The tired was still in her face. The tired was always there. It was a permanent resident. But underneath it, something else was visible now. Something that had been growing for a while and had finally gotten big enough to show through. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. Her hand was warm from the Morrow's kitchen. It was a hand that had done a tremendous amount of work, and it held his hand the way it always had. Firmly, the way you hold something you are not going to drop. "I have spent a lot of years," she said quietly, "being angry at what your father leaving took from you. All the things you should have had. All the things that were harder because there was only me." She stopped. Her voice stayed steady, but it cost her something. "And I am sitting here tonight looking at what you built out of what was left. And I don't have the words for it, Darrow. I really don't." The refrigerator hummed. The laundromat turned. "I have words," Darrow said. She looked up. He held her gaze and said simply and clearly, "Don't stop learning." For a moment, she just looked at him, and then Renly Finch laughed. The full laugh. The real one. The one she kept deep and brought out only when something caught her completely off guard in the best possible way. And it filled the small kitchen above the laundromat in the tired town of Hawick, and it was the best sound Darrow had heard in as long as he could remember. Georgette Nufo said yes. She said it the way certain people say yes. Not as a favor, not from obligation, but with the ease of someone who has been quietly hoping to be asked. Darrow had gone to the library on a Thursday afternoon, 4 days after the phone call, and had found her at the desk doing what she was always doing, which was reading something while simultaneously keeping track of every person in the building with some quiet and reliable part of her attention that never seemed to switch off. He waited until there was no one else at the desk. Then he stepped up and told her what he needed. He told it simply, the way he had learned to present things. Problem first, then the specific ask, then the reason it mattered. He told her about the Saturday architecture program in San Francisco, that it was free, that he had a way in through someone who believed in him, and that the only piece he could not solve alone was the 90 miles between Hawick and the city. He told her he had looked up Daly City. He told her he knew she went to her sister's on some Saturdays. He told her he understood if it was too much to ask. Georgette took her glasses off the chain and put them on and looked at him over the top of the frames for a long moment, the way she looked when she was deciding whether a book was right for someone. Then she said, "What time does the program start?" That was how it began. She drove him 14 Saturdays that first year. She did not make it feel like charity. She made it feel like arrangement. Two people going in the same direction for different but compatible reasons. She dropped him on the corner of the block where the university building sat, a tall gray stone building with wide windows that always seemed to be full of light. And she went to her sister's in Daly City, and in the afternoon she came back and he climbed into the passenger seat and they drove south along the coast road with the ocean to their right, gray and enormous and permanent. On those drives he told her what he had learned. She listened the way she had always listened, fully without rushing him, asking questions only when a question would open something wider rather than interrupt. She told him once that listening to him describe buildings was the most interesting she had ever found a car ride. He was not sure whether to believe that. She told him to believe it. The program was run by a man named Professor Ogilvy Andren. Professor Andren was a small man, shorter than Darrow's mother, narrower than most, with a white beard trimmed to precise edges and square glasses, and the kind of posture that belonged to someone who had spent decades standing in front of rooms deciding they were worth standing in front of. He wore the same style of clothing every Saturday: dark trousers, white shirt, a jacket in some muted color, and he carried a black marker in his breast pocket that he uncapped and recapped constantly while he talked. And he drew on everything: whiteboards, paper, the backs of old blueprints. Once on the brown bag his lunch had come in when nothing else was nearby. He had 12 students. Darrow was the youngest by 4 years. The others, 16 and 17 mostly, looked at him the first Saturday with the careful sideways curiosity of people who are not sure whether to be impressed or skeptical. He did not say much. He sat and listened and filled his notebook with the quiet thoroughness that had become as natural to him as breathing. By the third Saturday, Professor Andren was calling on him most, not to test him, not to put the young one on display. But because Darrow's answers did something the other answers did not. When the professor asked why a particular building design failed the people who lived inside it, the older students talked about load-bearing walls and sightlines and material costs. Darrow talked about the way a ceiling that was too low made a person feel pressed down on, about how a window in the wrong place meant you never got morning light in the room where you needed energy most, about how a floor plan that put the bathroom too far from the bedroom said something about whose comfort the designer had been thinking of, and it was not the person living there. He talked about these things because he had lived them, because the apartment above the laundromat had taught him, inch by inch, exactly what it felt like to be in a space that had been built without you in mind. Professor Andren listened to these answers with his marker held still, which was how you knew he was listening at his deepest level. At the end of the year, after the last Saturday, he asked Darrow to stay behind while the others filed out. He stood beside his desk with his arms folded and his glasses pushed up his nose, and he looked at Darrow the way Georgette sometimes looked at him, the look of someone measuring not what you are, but what you are going to become. In 30 years of teaching, Professor Andren said carefully, I have not encountered a student who brought what you bring into a room. He paused. You have a quality that cannot be taught. You understand what buildings feel like to the people who need them most. That understanding is the foundation of the best architecture there is. Everything else can be learned. He put his marker in his pocket. And you will learn it. I am going to make sure of that. Darrow rode home with Georgette that evening and told her what the professor had said. She kept her eyes on the coast road and nodded once. He's right, she said. You haven't heard my work, Darrow said. No, she said. But I've heard you think for a year. That's enough. Each October, he called the number. Each October, the voice answered, dry and steady and unhurried. And they talked, really talked, the way two people talk when they are both paying close attention and neither of them is performing. At 11, he reported 3 things: that he had learned how compression and tension worked in structures, that he had designed a new layout for the library's reading corner that Georgette had actually implemented, and that he wanted to understand urban planning, how entire neighborhoods got designed or failed to, and why some places felt alive and others felt forgotten. The man connected him with a woman named Rosamund Weil, who ran an urban planning consultancy in Los Angeles, focused entirely on neighborhoods that had been overlooked for decades. She took one phone call with Darrow and then agreed to mentor him by email, which became a correspondence that ran for 3 years and filled 2 full binders. At 14, he was accepted to a summer design program at UC Berkeley. The fee was $800. He called. He reported his 3 things, as always. Then at the end, he mentioned Berkeley. He mentioned the fee the way you mention a fact, not asking, just placing it on the table so the full picture was clear. There was a pause, then, "I'll handle the fee. The rest is on you." He went to Berkeley for 3 summers. He slept in the dormitories and ate in the dining hall and worked alongside students who were 16 and 17 and 18 and who had been preparing for exactly this kind of program their entire academic lives. He was younger than all of them and had prepared differently than any of them. Not with tutors and test prep and curated extracurriculars, but with library books and a librarian who drove on Saturdays and a notebook he had filled 3 times over, and the specific education that comes from having lived inside the problem you are trying to solve. He held his own, more than held it. Each October, the phone, the voice, the 3 things. Clint never offered money again after Berkeley, not once, and Darrow never asked. What passed between them in those annual calls had long since stopped being about resources. It was something else. It was the ongoing proof, year after year, that someone who did not have to was choosing to keep track, choosing to stay, choosing to pick up on the second ring and say, "Yes, I remember, let me hear your 3 things." For a boy who had grown up eating cereal with water in an apartment where the lights sometimes went out, who had learned to make himself small so his mother wouldn't hear him hurting, who had been told without words by a coffee can and a breath-shaped laugh that he was not the kind of person things happen for. Being remembered consistently across years by someone who owed him nothing, that was the thing. That was the whole thing. That was worth more than any dollar figure ever printed. 22 years passed, not in a blur, not quietly. They passed the way years pass when you are building something real. One decision at a time, one October call at a time, one notebook filled and set aside and replaced with another. They passed with setbacks that felt permanent until they didn't, with breakthroughs that felt sudden but had been years in the making, with the slow and sometimes painful process of becoming someone in a world that had not initially arranged itself to make that easy. Darrow Finch was 31 years old when he stood at the podium inside the auditorium of the Harwick Community Center and looked out at 500 people and tried to find the place inside himself where his speech was stored. He had written it. He had practiced it. He knew it well enough that he could have delivered it in his sleep. But standing there looking out at the room, at the faces, at the light coming through the tall windows he had designed to face exactly this way, so the afternoon sun fell at exactly this angle, warm and unhurried, filling the room like something poured. He lost the speech entirely, not in a panicked way, in the way of a person who has found something more true than what they had prepared. He found the feeling instead, the feeling from the pale stone sidewalk in Carmel by the sea. The feeling of sitting down on a bench next to a tall man who had no reason to sit down. The feeling of a card being pressed into a 9-year-old hand by someone who had decided, without being asked, that the hand was worth filling. He found that feeling and he held on to it the way he had held on to everything that mattered, and he began to speak. Renly Finch sat in the front row in a yellow dress she had bought specifically for this day. She was not bothering to hide the fact that she was crying. She had stopped hiding things like that sometime in her 50s and had found life considerably lighter as a result. Beside her sat Georgette Nufo, who was holding her hand with the firm, unhurried grip of a woman who has been holding people steady for a long time and is very good at it. Georgette was not crying. She was listening with her whole face, the way she had always listened, every Saturday drive, every library afternoon, every conversation that a boy had needed her to receive and keep safe. 3 rows back, Professor Ogilvy Andren sat with his arms folded and his head tilted slightly backward, looking at the ceiling the way a carpenter looks at a roof, not casually, but with the eye of someone assessing every choice that went into building it. Every few seconds, his lips moved almost imperceptibly. He was having thoughts about the structure. This was how he showed respect. Darrow told the story from the beginning. He told it the way it had actually happened, in order, without polish or performance. He told them about the field trip in the minivan and the stop in Carmel that was not supposed to happen. He told them about the pale stone streets and the window boxes full of flowers, and the 9-year-old boy from Harwick who had walked half a block alone just to look at a place that beautiful before he had to get back in the van. He told them about the man coming out of the coffee shop. He told them about the dollar he had asked for and had not received. He told them about the bench and the conversation and the 2 roads. He told them what the man had said: "You are not what happened to you. You are what you decide to do next." And as he said it, he watched those words move through the room, the way they had moved through him on that sidewalk at 9 years old, finding every person in the audience who needed them and landing there. He told them about the card, about the 3 words pressed into cream-colored paper, about placing it on the shelf between a spelling bee certificate and his mother's photograph, about the 47 library visits and the notebooks and the letter to Mr. Prieto and the 11 days, about the phone call on the anniversary, about the 4 rings and the voice and the 2 words, "I remember," that had held an entire year together. He told them about Georgette and her Saturday drives, about Professor Andren and the black marker, about Berkeley and the dormitory and holding his own alongside students who had been preparing differently for their whole lives, about the October calls, 22 of them, 1 every year, never once missed on either end of the line. The auditorium was silent in the specific way that 500 people are silent when they have all stopped thinking about themselves and are thinking about the same thing at the same time. "I called him for the last time 3 years ago," Darrow said. His voice was steady. Something behind his eyes was not, but he had learned long ago that those were not the same thing and that only one of them needed to be. He told me he thought I had probably paid off whatever debt he felt he owed by then, that he considered us even. He paused. I disagreed. I told him I planned to spend the rest of my life paying it forward, and that this seemed to me like its own way of paying it back. There was a pause, and then he said, "That's acceptable." He looked out at the room. "That is probably the highest praise I have ever received from anyone." A current of laughter moved through the room, warm and real. "I want to tell you something about that man that I did not know on the day I walked up to him," Darrow said. "I did not know who he was. I had no cable television. I had seen almost no movies. I had no frame for him at all. To me, he was simply a tall man on a sidewalk who looked like someone who had stood in front of hard things and had not stepped back from them." He paused. "I asked him for $1 because I was hungry and because the fire in my chest that day had not yet learned to be afraid of strangers." He stopped for a moment. Let the room stay with that. "He did not give me $1. He gave me 22 years of proof that I was a person worth paying attention to. And you have to understand, for a kid who had spent his whole life eating cereal with water and stuffing cardboard in the toes of his shoes and trying very hard not to make too much noise about any of it, 22 years of being remembered by someone who owed him nothing is not a small thing." His voice dropped slightly. "It is not a small thing at all." The yellow dress in the front row, Renly pressing her free hand flat against her collarbone the way she did when she was trying to keep something in. Darrow looked at her for just a moment. Then he looked back at the room. "Some of you have heard me mention, over the past few years, that there was something about this building I was not ready to tell until it was open, until real people were standing inside it, until it had stopped being a plan and had become a place." He let that sit. "Today it is a place, and so I am ready." The room changed. The quality of the silence deepened. 500 people leaning forward by half an inch without being aware of doing it. 3 years ago, on the last October call, I told him about this project. I told him what I wanted it to be. A library for children who don't have easy access to books. A community kitchen for families who are counting what's in the refrigerator the same way my mother once counted pennies in a glass jar. A homework room so that a kid who lives in a one-room apartment above a laundromat has somewhere to go after school that is quiet and warm and full of the right kind of light. He paused. A place where what happened to me could happen to someone else. The good part. The part where someone makes space for you. He looked down at the podium. His hands were flat on either side of his notes. He was quiet for a long time after I described it. long enough that I thought the call had dropped. And then he said, "I want to do something." I told him he had already done enough. More than enough. More than I could ever properly account for. He said, "Let me do this one thing." He looked up. He made a gift to this building, a significant one, the kind that made the roof garden possible, that made the homework room possible, that turned what I could afford to build into what you are sitting inside right now. His voice held. And he asked only one thing in return. He asked me not to tell anyone until the building was real, until people were in it, because he did not do it for recognition. He did it because when someone trusts you with a moment, when a 9-year-old sits down next to you on a bench and listens to you with everything they have, you honor that. You honor it with action. You honor it with the rest of your life. The room was completely still. This building is called the Finch Renly Learning Center. He looked at his mother. She pressed her lips together hard and nodded once. A very small nod, the kind that holds a universe. Named for her. That was the only condition I set, and he agreed without a moment's pause. He breathed. But there is a room in this building, right off the library, a small room with good light and 4 chairs and a round table and a window that faces the water. I designed it to be the quietest room in the building. The room where a child could come and sit and think and read and be completely undisturbed by the rest of the world. I designed it first before I knew how I was going to pay for it, because it was the heart of the whole thing, and hearts do not wait for funding. One more breath. That room is called the Clint Eastwood room. The auditorium held the silence for exactly 1 second. 1 second of 500 people understanding at the same time what they had just been told, what it meant, how far it went back, how many years it covered, how many notebooks and library visits and October phone calls and Saturday drives it spanned. 1 second. And then the room came apart in the best possible way. In applause that started in the middle and spread to the edges like a wave, rising and rising until it filled every corner of the building that Darrow Finch had designed, with the knowledge he had gathered in the years since a man he did not recognize sat down beside him on a bench and decided he was worth the time. The crowd took a long time to empty. People moved through the building the way people move through a place they are trying to memorize, slowly touching things, pausing in doorways, looking up at the ceiling, and then at each other with the expression of people who are having the same feeling at the same time and know it. The community kitchen, the homework room with its long table and its 10 chairs and its corkboard already pinned with the drawings of the children who had toured the building that morning. The library, smelling of new books and the particular clean wood smell of freshly built shelves, and the small room off the library with the 4 chairs and the round table and the window that faced the water. The Clint Eastwood room. People stopped there the longest. Darrow came outside when the crowd had thinned enough to breathe. He stood on the front steps of the building in the October afternoon light, and he looked at Harik. The town had not transformed. It was still itself, low and weathered and a little tired in the way of places that have absorbed a great deal of history without much of it being the good kind. The gas station was still there, the dollar store, Lupe's diner, where his mother had poured coffee for 20 years, the harbor with the fishing boats that came back with less than they used to. But the building was there now too, right at the corner of Clement and 4th, 2 blocks from where he had grown up, where the lot had been empty for a decade and full of weeds and broken glass, and the particular sadness of space that nobody has claimed for anything good. He had claimed it. He had spent 2 years getting the permits and the funding and the engineering right, and now it stood there in the October light, brick and glass and a roof garden full of things that were still growing, and it was real in the way that only things you have built with your whole self are real. He heard her footsteps. He had always been able to pick them out. Renly came and stood beside him. She put her hand through the crook of his arm the way she had done when he was small, the way that had always meant, "I am here, I have you. The 2 of us are enough." She was still in the yellow dress. Her eyes were dry now, but the marks of the afternoon were still on her face, and she wore them without apology, the way she wore most things. They stood together looking at the town for a while. Then she said quietly, as if she had been working up to it, "I used to think I had let you down." He started to speak. She held up her free hand, a small gesture. patient but firm. "Let me finish," she said. "I used to lie awake and think about all the mornings I was gone before you woke up. All the dinners you heated yourself. All the school things I wasn't there for. All the nights you were on that side of the curtain and I was on the other side. And neither of us was saying what we were actually carrying." She stopped, breathed. "I used to think that the hard parts of your childhood were my fault. That you had become who you are despite me, not because of anything I gave you." "Mom," he said, "that's not—" "I know," she said. "I know that now. I've known it for a while. But I need to say the whole thing, so let me." She looked at the building, at the words carved in the stone above the door, Finch Renly Learning Center, in the particular font he had chosen because it was clean and strong and legible from a distance. Because he had wanted a child walking past on the street to be able to read it easily. "I watched you grow up and I started to think that maybe the hard parts didn't just happen to you. Maybe they went into you. Maybe they became part of what you were building from." She paused. "And I didn't know for a long time whether to feel better or worse about that." The October air came off the water, cool and salt edge, the same air that had come off the water every October of Darrow's life. "And then today," Renly said softly, "I sat in that room and I listened to you tell the story from the beginning. And then I walked through this building. And I thought, both. Both things are true. It was hard. And it built him. And it is all right that both things are true. It doesn't have to be one or the other." She leaned her head against his shoulder, just briefly, the weight of it. "Your father missed everything," she said. Darrow did not say anything for a moment. There was not much to say about Garrett Finch that had not already been said by his absence across 3 decades. There was something almost restful about that, the way a wound that has fully healed no longer needs attention. "His loss," he said. "His loss," Renly agreed. They stood there for a while longer, the boy who had been hungry and the woman who had counted pennies, on the steps of a building that had their name on it, in the town that had given up on itself but was now, today in the October light, quietly beginning to remember that it had not always. Inside the building, in the small room with good light and the window facing the water, there was a plaque on the wall. Darrow had written the words himself and had rewritten them 11 times before they were right. The plaque read, "This room is named in gratitude, because one man sat down, because one boy asked, because what you give a child is never just what you hand them. It is every door that opens because they were brave enough to knock on yours." And below that, in letters slightly smaller, "To every child who sits in this room, you are not what happened to you. You are what you decide to do next. D. Finch, architect. C. Eastwood, friend." That same afternoon, while Darrow was still on the steps with his mother, while Georgette was inside showing Professor Andrin the reading corner she had helped design, while the last of the crowd was drifting out through the wide front doors into the October light, a girl came in. She was 9 years old. She was alone. She had walked in off the street, not because she had been brought, not because a parent had told her to, but because the door was open and the light inside looked warm, and she had been walking past for 20 minutes looking at it, and eventually her feet had made the decision her shyness was trying to avoid. She wore shoes that were slightly too small. The kind of too small that you can see at a glance, but that the person wearing them has long since stopped noticing, because there is no point in noticing things you cannot yet change. She stood in the library doorway and looked, at the shelves that went all the way to the ceiling, at the afternoon light lying in long, warm rectangles on the wooden floor, at the tables and the chairs and the corkboard, and the round room just off the main floor with the window that looked out at the gray water. She looked at all of it with the expression of someone who has just walked into a place that was made for them without knowing it would be. The expression of being, quietly and completely, seen. She walked inside. She went to the nearest shelf and ran her finger along the spines the way you run a finger along something you are not sure is real yet. She pulled out a book. She looked at the cover. She looked around, found the table by the window, walked to it, sat down, and opened to the first page. She began to read. From the front steps, Darrow did not see any of this. He was looking at the town, but somewhere in him, in the place where the fire had been burning since he was 9 years old, and decided something in the fourth row of a classroom while a coffee can moved away from him. Somewhere in that place, something settled. Quietly, completely, like a key turning in a lock that had been waiting a very long time. People still talk about this story as if the unbelievable part is Clint Eastwood. As if the miracle is that a famous man once sat down on a sidewalk bench with a hungry kid and said something wise. As if that is the thing that defies explanation, the thing that makes people shake their heads and say, "Can you imagine?" But that is not the unbelievable part. The unbelievable part is what the boy did with it. Because here is a truth about moments like the one on that pale stone sidewalk in Carmel by the sea. They happen more often than anyone realizes. People say the right words to children all the time. Strangers offer unexpected kindness. Teachers hold the door open a beat longer than they had to. Librarians put exactly the right book in exactly the right hands. The world looked at, honestly, is full of people trying to pass something good to someone who needs it. Most of the time it lands and dissolves. Like water on dry ground, absorbed, gone, leaving no visible trace. The unbelievable thing is not that Clint Eastwood handed a card to a poor kid instead of $1. The unbelievable thing is that Darrow Finch, 9 years old, alone in an apartment above a laundromat that smelled like mold, in a town that tourists drove through without stopping, in shoes stuffed with cardboard, took that card and held on to it with everything he had, because he already understood at 9 that it was the most important thing anyone had ever given him. Not because of what it was, because of what it asked him to become. The unbelievable thing is that some children, when handed a single thread of belief, will pull it taut and walk the whole length of it, through the dark and the doubt and the years, and weave an entire world from the other end. The unbelievable thing is the boy. It has always been the boy. And that is the story of Darrow Finch, a boy who asked for $1 and got something that lasted a lifetime. Before you go, drop a comment below and tell us, where in the world are you watching this from? Whether you are in a small town like Harwick or a big city thousands of miles away, we want to hear from you. This community comes from every corner of the world, and every single comment reminds us why stories like this one matter. If this story moved you, if it made you think about one person who sat down with you when they didn't have to, or one moment that changed the direction of your life, please hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it helps this story reach someone out there who needs to hear it today. And if you believe that kindness is worth spreading, that one moment, one conversation, one decision to stop and pay attention can change everything, then subscribe to this channel. Every story we tell is built on that belief, and we are just getting started. There is a video on your screen right now. Click it, because the next story might be the one that stays with you forever. We will see you there.